skill nets and the chambers on it as well. That would be really fantastic, just to spread the word. Last week we had Brian Harney, who's a professor in strategy and HRM in Dublin Business School, join us, and he discussed strategy with us. He was really encouraging us all to stand outside of our normal thinking space on a daily basis as we start to replan our business. And he gave us a framework with 3 key areas last week. Firstly, to reflect, secondly, to refresh, and thirdly, to renew. And to use those 3 areas for us to start re-strategizing on our business as we drive out of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 for recovery and, of course, for growth as well in due course. This week, we're absolutely delighted that we have Brendan Binchy with us, and he's going to be discussing finance with us this week. So if you bear with me for 2 moments, before I hand over to Brendan, I'd like to read out to you his impressive bio. So Brendan has over 3 decades experience as a business transition consultant, developing strategies to see businesses through times of major change, just like now. In good times, that's fueling growth in privately owned enterprises, but in bad times, it's managing and resetting business models, as he's done over 3 economic downturns at this stage. He possesses a unique range of practical, down-to-earth business skills that pivot around his core expertise in strategic finance, but that also encompasses the functional areas of operations, sales and marketing, people and systems. As a recognised thought leader in advising SMEs, he delivers the finance pillar on the Go Global for Growth strategy programme with DCU Business School and Enterprise Ireland. He serves on numerous boards, including Voxpro, who he's a former chairman for, Windmill Lane Pictures and Twi, who he's the current chairman of. And in addition, he holds multiple advisory positions across a diverse range of industries. So again, we're in very good hands this morning as we talk about finance. Mr. Brendan Binchy, it's over to you.
On mute. Now, sorry, we had a little, can you hear me now? You can. I'm unmuted. Great. Good morning to you all, and listen, thank you for gathering here today. And I hope the investment in time that you are making this morning will reap some rewards for you as you try and manage your way through this extraordinary time that we're all experiencing. So let me start off. You see a little quotation there actually on the slide there from Charles Darwin, The Survival of the Fittest, what do you call that whole theory of evolution. Anyway, so hopefully we can kind of tap into that. But it says basically, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. I'm hoping to redress that a little bit and kind of focus more on giving you a little bit of knowledge so that you will have the self-confidence to actually move through this extraordinarily difficult time. And hopefully what I want to really do is try and give you a roadmap that, I mean, I can't drive down the road with you, but I can give you a roadmap and an approach to working out how you can kind of get through the crisis. So in order to get the right answers, I always say that the most important thing is to ask yourself the right questions. And asking the right questions is a sign of strength. So again, but what do you call it? So don't be afraid really to actually post questions up here today, and have confidence in what you do know. In times like this, when the kind of whole world is kind of, the carpet is pulled from under your feet, we kind of doubt ourselves a lot and where we go. Rely, if you can, on what you know. You've developed probably a lifetime of experience in your particular industry or area. That isn't gone. But what might need to happen is that you adapt from it. So this is, I hope, a safe environment for you to challenge yourself. And there is no such thing as a stupid question, because there's probably another 20 or 30 people with the same question out there that's looking for an answer. So Shona did a very flattering job of introducing myself. So thank you for that, Shona. I suppose my background, again, I mean, I've worked in retail. It's not all kind of industrial business. It's retail, both large and small. So I've worked for PLCs, and I've worked in, my own dad was a family businessman running a kind of a newsagent TSN type store. So I appreciate both things. This isn't all about big business, you know. So, but my work, that's all, that kind of experience has kind of helped in my independent financial management kind of consultancy, so to speak. And I do a huge amount of work with EI, so I get a lot of insights into people and businesses and the struggles, and I'm already getting probably more than I would have anticipated the challenges that they're facing as they're trying to work their way through. My core competencies would effectively be in and around scaling businesses. That's where the Voxpro story would have come from. So that's what I'm supposed to be reasonably good at, according to other people. And business transition, which is really what today is all about. This COVID crisis is like a black swan. It's a black swan event in that you don't see them all the time. But like it or not, it's kind of landed on top of us and we have to deal with it. And what you need to do when you're in any sort of transition event is to try and plan and manage your way through it and then try and get to the other side. So it's really about downturn agility. And I was looking up, since I was born, there seems to have been 10 recessions. So I always say, bless me, Father, this is my fourth active recession to actually work through. As the previous were when I was a young lad. But these things happen and they end. And that's kind of important to keep in mind. When we're talking about this, we will get over this. I'm a great believer in the ingenuity of the human spirit, and especially when it comes to entrepreneurs and business owners. They've proved time and time again that that they have the resilience to actually change what they do. But more to the topic, my time has taught me over this a couple of one basic self-evident truth, that you can't ignore the finance element of the business at the expense of everything else, like marketing, sales, operations. I mean, it really is at the heart of the game of business. And I often say, when it comes, I'm an accountant myself by training. I don't, but I often slag off my own profession by saying, that sometimes when we look at the money side of it, it's kind of become confusing what you do. And accountants, I would say, kind of could be accused of that they looked in the game of business to always be regarded as players, or at least referees in the whole game of business. But they were relegated to the humble position of scorekeeper. And their revenge for that ignominy is that sometimes they keep the score in a way that nobody can ascertain the state of play of the business. And I'm slagging my own there now, but that's it. So what we really want to try and focus on when we look at finances, trying to correlate the finance function with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, whether that's selling a service as a solicitor, whether it's trading as a retailer, or whether it's a manufacturer. The finance thing is always going to be pivotal. And as I said, I think we need to look to old wisdom to tackle new problems. And there's a lot of old solid wisdom out there that you kind of lean back on and say, listen, that's got me through other things before. One of the things when it comes to business, I've always been a great fan, especially small business, of a guy called Michael Gerber, who wrote a book called The E-Myth. And he reckons that every business owner has kind of a schizophrenic personality. And that schizophrenic personality accommodates three personality types. One is the technician, the person who does things. So if you're getting a hairdresser, you're cutting the hair. If you're a solicitor, you're doing soliciting, whatever. If you're a painter, it's painting the buildings. So that's the technique. You're good at what you do and you do it. Then you have the manager in you, which is kind of organizing jobs. And it's not just doing the work, it's organizing the jobs in and around it and making sure that work flows through and moves on. And then we have the entrepreneur character within us all, who wants to kind of break new boundaries, kind of look for new opportunities. And often cases, the technician, who's somebody who's kind of a good baker or barber, opens their coffee shop, or so they get hit with this entrepreneurial seizure, and then they tend to get sucked into kind of the day-to-day routines of trying to do what has to be done, manage what has to be done, and sometimes the entrepreneurial spirit just dies out a little bit because you get swamped with work, and that's really normal. What you need to wake up this time around, though, and I think Brian may have been talking about that last week, is the entrepreneur in you. Because with the Black Swan event I just talked about before, you really have to look at kind of, in many cases, of reinventing yourself with your skills. You still have your technical skills, you have management experience, but now you may need to apply it in the new world. So hold that little thing, wake up the entrepreneur inside you if you can, just as much as you can. other piece of old wisdom, I always lean back on a guy called Stephen Covey. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But in nearly every difficult situation you have, there's some what I call self-evident wisdom in there. And that can be applied in times of crises as well. I mean, his habits there, he talks about being proactive. So don't wait for stuff to come to you. That you've got to go and do something and be proactive about what you're doing. And that's especially true in a time of crisis. Don't wait for the tide to drown you. You've got to refocus where you see yourself in 2 to 3 years' time. So that's the beginning with the end in mind habit he talks about. And that's kind of really important. We reset and kind of get some goals for ourselves, set some direction. And in my work with a lot of Enterprise Ireland clients, it's in a time of uncertainty, that's really hard to do. But you still have got to try and do it as best you can. And then quite naturally, you'll also need to prioritize things, because there's 101 things you could think of doing, but you've got to see what's going to have the biggest bang for the buck, what's going to have the most impact on your business. So prioritization is going to become a really important thing. And I hope some of the stuff that I go through today, I'm not expecting you to do everything, but if there's 2 or 3 things that you can focus on and take away and say, listen, I'm going to prioritize that 1, 2, or 3, then we'll have got somewhere with today, and your time will have been well invested. His other habits is thinking about win-win. So when you're looking at new business models or kind of changing what you do, you've got to make sure it's not just good for you, it's got to be good for the people you're trying to sell to. It's the way most business works best. You know, what's good for your best customers really understand and get where you come from, and vice versa. Your best customers are regarded as like that for yourself, because it's you know, that's a win-win combination. Then again, I suppose one of the things that we also need to, he talks about kind of seeking first to understand and then be understood. And I think that's really important. That's kind of a time for reflection. I think Brian said one of those things you said, Shona, was kind of reflect and kind of look at it. That's kind of trying to understand. And I'm going to kind of hit that same echo today, or in and around the finance function, to look at the business. But I'm not just looking at money here. It's money in relation to the total business. It doesn't sit separately from it. So try and understand our businesses better. And then when you understand it, we can start to change things. And you're looking for synergies here, which is another habit. It is where kind of when we add a couple of things together, will they work? So, and by being here today, you're actually practicing the 7th habit, which is sharpening the saw, re-educating yourself, stretching your boundaries out. So that's enough of the theory at the moment, and I'll launch into the content, but I just wanted to kind of have a general conversation before I started to do that. Now I'm going to show you, you'll see, I hope, I can get where's my screen? Screen is, yeah, here we go. Switched on. So you'll see a lovely little leopard there with lots of coronavirus spots on him. And that's an image I kind of blagged from The Economist, because I read an article there and it really resonated with me in trying to kind of pull kind of what we're all going through at the moment. And whether we like it or not, if you're in business, you're in the business of survival at the moment. Okay, some industries may be doing better than others, but most people are in really troubled times. So let me just kind of synopsize what was in that article that resonated with me, just to position what we're going to actually talk about. Like, most countries are accounting for about 50% of the world gross domestic product were in lockdown over the last number of months. There was a complete collapse in commercial activity, stating the obvious, obviously, but this is far more severe than we've seen in any previous recessions. And the exit path from lockdowns are going to be very precarious. We're seeing that right across Europe and the States at the moment, the stop-start. A lot of uneasy consumers out there, and the rhythm, when you're starting and stopping like that, that inhibits efficiency. And you're going to have kind of overlays of tricky new health protocols. Ask anyone in the restaurant or bar business about that. So the firms that are actually going to survive this are going to have to master a new environment. And as the crisis evolves, and they've got to be able to respond to it and set new trends for things that are going to happen in the future. And those businesses that survive now, a lot will depend on their industry. Like, what type of business are they in? The tech industry industry is booming at the moment. You know, the health industry is going to be strong. You know, there's very robust industries out there. But if you're in a consumer-facing industry, I mean, that is, you couldn't be in any tougher time. We're going through something like nobody has seen before. So that's the first thing. So, you know, the firms that survive now will depend on their industry. It'll also depend on their state of their balance sheets. And your balance sheet, if you think about it, I mean, this is where this is our first dip into the financial speak. So the balance sheets, I mean, that's not stuff just for the accountants, the druids that come into your business once a year. Your balance sheet is basically a snapshot of where you are relative to where all your money's tied up and who you owe. So you've got your fixed assets at the top, which is basically your buildings and equipment or whatever. You have your debtors, people that owe you money. You have cash in the bank, hopefully. You have stock sitting in there or work in progress. And on the other side, you have people you owe money to and short-term creditors. You may have invoice discounts. And then you move down and you may have some more long-term debt. And at any moment in time, if you take a snapshot, let's say at the end of June, there's a balance sheet there. And that kind of really determines what they call how much of the business you own and how much maybe third parties have invested in it. And if your balance sheet is very heavily laden with debt, be that trade creditors, be that, big overdrafts, invoice discounting, large long-term debts, if you're highly geared, that makes you weaker. So the strength of your balance sheet, if you have loads of cash on the other hand, that makes you really strong and resilient. So again, the firms that survive into it, if their balance sheets are strong, they have a better chance of getting there. And we want to talk about that a little bit more later. But the other thing too, and I think most people have demonstrated an ability, how easily you can tap into government loans, guarantee and aid was also important. Now, most people businesses by necessity have tapped into the support schemes for employees to try and maintain the businesses out there. And that happened very quickly, in fairness to our government. They made it extraordinarily complicated, but it was very readily available and needs must, and most people got used to kind of working from net back to gross rather than gross to net when it came to payrolls to access those funds. And there is a lot of support available now. Most of it is in the form of debt. Certainly for the larger firms, I'm seeing in Enterprise Ireland with their, sustaining enterprise fund and strategic banking corporation funds that are out there too. They've basically COVID schemes, which is the Brexit scheme, basically retitled with the COVID working capital scheme. But they're all debt, and I think there's a general sense out there that there's going to be more coming from the government because it's going to be needed. So again, the firms that can tap into that quickly and effectively, all of that will have an impact on ability to survive. But once this exit from lockdown starts, which it has, and people start with antibody testing, like Luke O'Neill is saying out there, that they're going to have something on that side of things this year, but maybe not a vaccine until next year. But if you think about it, a new intermediate phase has begun already at this stage as we are emerging out there. But a lot of businesses will still be walking, not running. Okay, so, and we can see that. You don't have to walk down any main street. Half the pubs are still closed, shops, all these. So consumers are still kind of scared, so to speak, and they need reassurance. And there's very mixed opinions about how that should evolve. But but firms, when it comes to businesses, it's not back to where it was before. And in truth, folks, it's probably never going to go back to there. There's a new normal out there. So ingenuity, not just financial muscle, will become a source of advantage. And cleverer firms and businesses, will those who kind of demonstrate that ingenuity, will be quicker at getting back up to near full speed. And that could be, I don't know, it depends again on your industry. That could be 12 months, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. Some of the scenarios we're running out for a lot of businesses that we're helping to plan at the moment, we're looking at 3-year bounce back recovery periods, trying to be real. And we'll have all seen the kind of what has to be done in practical terms, reconfiguring what you do, whether that's a factory line. But you've got to look at all this physical distancing, remote monitoring, deep cleans. They're an extra overlay of expense that has just been laid upon everybody. And as I say, consumer-facing firms have a real problem or a real challenge in that they will constantly need to reassure their customers, especially if there's spikes when it comes out there. And all of that has, you know, this as kind of supply chains have stopped across many industries. If you look at even the likes of Apple, I think they have just 10 days worth of inventory or stock at any one time. And its main suppliers are over there in Asia. So, you know, there's supply chain issues. So basically, I think what's going to happen here is that there's three basic trends that are going to come in. First, I suppose what you're going to see is a quicker adoption of new technologies, right? So the planet has had a crash course in e-commerce, digital payments, remote working. And it's incredible. I was working with companies that were saying, looking at that as a 3 to 4 year strategy. It became a 3 to 4 week strategy by necessity, which shows you just how quickly things are changing. And we're going to see more medical innovations, you know, and stuff that are going to kind of come out, new technologies, and they're medical based technologies that are going to have, what you're going to see that trend coming out because there's a huge amount of work going on in that area. The whole issue of supply chains is going to be a huge thing. Before this, even the COVID crisis started, we were seeing a trade war evolve between America and the rest of Europe. And when the COVID-19 crisis landed, that exacerbated that. So, and we see firms kind of looking for bigger safety buffers. They have to carry more stock. Chinese suppliers who were really kind of cost effective but had long lead times just couldn't meet order quantities. So you're going to see businesses move that closer to home. So you may see more activity in that kind of area where production comes closer to home. You're going to see more automation involved in a lot of businesses. And cross-border business investment where people, that's going to slow down. So we're not going to see wads of cash coming from abroad or vice versa. You know, that could drop up by 40, 50%. And global firms probably are going to become less profitable, but a little bit more resilient because the fragility has been opened up by the COVID crisis. But the counterintuitive thing here is that there's a huge amount of cash out there. We've come into this recession an awful lot better as an economy and as companies than we did with the last, which was a debt kind of forced crisis. So there's a lot of cash out there, and that cash is looking for a home. All you have to do is look at the stock market across the world, rising counterintuitively at a time of crisis. That's cash just looking for a home. And big firms are going to grow bigger, and they're going to kind of look to kind of mop up. You know, if there are bargains out there with firms that have liquidity problems, there could be big opportunities. So I think you're going to see a lot more corporate, consolidation. And anyway, that's just the state of the play. And I thought, as I said, that article resonated with me, and I think it made a huge amount of sense. So, but as I said before, this will pass. And there will be a fresh wave of business energy, and that's going to be unleashed in the coming months. Someone's going to do it. Okay, that's enough of the general. Let's just talk now a little bit about turning a little bit what I call common sense into common practice. So for you as a business owner or manager, looking at the kind of the core issues that you need to address. And that comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, asking yourself, what I would call the 3 basic questions that you need to ask yourself when it comes to looking at your business from a financial perspective. And it's not solely financial. I always say, as I say, a business model is made up, and we're going to talk about that, of not just the finance, but it's also about kind of what you sell and who you sell it to. But you start with first question, you go off and ask yourself, how is my business positioned financially? You know, and that kind of goes back to looking at the balance sheet and all that stuff I talked before and what impact it has. So you've got to ask that question of yourself first. The second question is, how is it the business positioned strategically? You know, okay, this is what we did. Here's what happened to our customer base. what's going to happen in the future. They're strategic questions. That's the entrepreneur bit I was talking about before, where you've got to kind of recast and kind of look at, try and get a little bit more agile and get strategic by necessity. And then the third thing is, okay, you've asked the questions, what's the plan? How do you manage through this? So you need to have some idea, even in simple terms, just how you're going to manage through this crisis and the ensuing recessionary period. Because, like, I don't want to be a prophet of doom or anything like that at this stage here, but with all these subsidies and all that, we've really kind of been cushioned, and it's almost like the phony war, unless you happen to work for an airline or, you know, something that's kind of where the mass layoffs have started already. But like this, the real bite is going to happen in autumn of this year, into winter and early next year. And the response of the government and the response of business owners are going to determine how we're going to get out of it. But it ain't started yet. When those reliefs, and I think some of the COVID supports have fallen away today, and you know, they've certainly reduced, and we're going to see that kind of, you'll see the supports dumbing down, so to speak, from the point of the broad spectrum ones, and you'll see much more focused support going into businesses where you'll have to qualify on certain terms. Very much like, what do you call it? Excuse me now, would you believe someone's ringing me at this stage? Anyway, so we're going to see a lot more, what do you call it, focus on as we come in, where on crisis situations coming at the back end of this year, and we need to prepare ourselves. So the phony war is going to end. So what I want to do now is actually focus on, just let's talk about what do you focus on in a time of crisis, and how do you ask those strategic questions. So basically, I mean, let's consider this. I'm going to take it through a model, and you should see a little triangle up there which kind of says the business, and that's kind of your business, if you like. And your business has all sorts of external pressures on it. You don't control them. It's a bit like this COVID-19 crisis, but you operate in a particular industry, and that's going to be impacted one way or the other by this crisis. You have competitors out there, and they're actually scrambling and looking for ways to manage within this challenging period too. And so you have to keep an eye on them. There's the advance of technology, and that has an impact on your business, you know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, you know, we've seen all this remote working. It's an environmental issue. It's happening out there. And the world is kind of meeting on Zoom. I think a lot of people have actually got sick of meeting on Zoom now. There's been so many of them, and the luster. But from a business perspective, like, it's extraordinary with technology. I mean, I used to live in my car traveling the country. Certainly for 3 to 4 days a week, I haven't left my office in and around that time, but I'm managing to work through technology, and other businesses the same. You have customers out there. Well, how are they? What's the impact on your customers? And then you have your own shareholder circumstances, like what's happening out there. You know, I mean, have you more equity you can put into the business? Are you relying on the business to actually, you know, if this dries up, is your livelihood dries up? Your personal circumstances has an impact on the business as well as the general business environment, which has been knocked out by COVID. But you don't control that. What you control is what's within the little rocket, so to speak. So let me take in a little dance across that. So in any business, and if we start at the fins of the rocket, so to speak, you see at the top there, it says products and services, because every business is selling a product or a service. You need to sell it to somebody, so you need a marketing and sales function. You control that marketing and sales function. Finance, you need to make some money out of it, so finance important. That's the petrol in the car that keeps the whole business moving, and if that stops, and we've seen that the nature of that over the last couple of months, yeah, you're in real trouble. But those top three elements they're your business model drivers. If you haven't got a decent product or service, if you can't sell it to somebody, you know, can't get customers who want to buy it, and if you can't make money out of it, if any of those three elements are out of line, you haven't got a valid business model anymore. So again, this is a time for re-examining those things, and we're going to talk about that business model a little bit more in a few minutes. Then you have the things that enable you. So if they're the drivers, the things that enable your business to move forward is the people you have working for you. So not everyone, unless you're absolutely self-employed, you usually have people working for you. They help you do what you need to do, and they need to be managed and need to be paid. You also need systems and processes, actually, and everybody has it, whether there's from the very big advanced businesses might have a huge operations manual, but most small businesses have systems and processes that they use to make sure that their business takes over. My dad used to have his own systems and processes in his wee little shop. He was not very sophisticated, but he was able to kind of have his stock control systems and all that for managing what was going on in his particular business. So they don't have to be terribly formal, but you have them. Then you have the culture, and the smaller the business, the more the culture dominates how the thing is run, because it usually, most businesses are a reflection of the owners that run them, and if there's so there's a culture. And even big businesses, and Voxpro is a classic example of a business that grew huge. I mean, there was 2,000 or 3,000 people, but it had a unique culture and way of doing things that made it very, very different. What's beside that then is organizational structure. Like that's more form. The bigger the business, the more important that is, whether you have key functions for operations, marketing, sales functions, finance functions, HR. That's the formal part. So strategy, structure and culture tend to sit beside each other in any business, and you'll dial that up or down between those two depending on the size of the business. But every business, I believe, needs a strategy. And a strategy is kind of how you're going to get to where you want to get to it in 2 or 3 years. And you don't have to have a full, very complicated strategic plan to have a strategy or a fancy document. I've seen some of the cleverest people I've worked with are people who've probably don't even have a secondary education, but are very clear about what they want to achieve in their business, what size they want to grow to, and very impressive. So, and that's because they have a vision. And the vision is they see themselves where they want to be in 2 or 3 years' time. They're beginning with the end in mind, as I referred to with Stephen Covey. And everything within that little triangle, or I like to call it the rocket, is the piece you drive. So you can't control the environment, but you can control what goes on within your own business and how you respond to it across all those areas. And we're going to revisit that basic model as we move through this morning as well. Now, so there's 3 basic areas of focus that you should look at in a time of crisis. And the first and biggest one that you look there is your valuable formula, right? So this is reassessing the competitive element that generates a profit and sustainable success for your business. That's your valuable formula. And we're going to go into the components of that next. The second thing you need to focus on at the end is your operations. And that's changing the way businesses work to adapt quickly to a changed environment. And by golly, we've had that in trumps over the last two months, where you have to get out there and modify your operations. And all of these, by the way, have a financial implication in them at the end of the day. Just to think, in case you think this is all theory and no money, they have a serious implication when it comes to cash. But the third one is uniquely focused on the whole cash finance element. And this is trying to establish the absolute priority of cash over profit. And that's in the short term now, not in the long term. But while the storm is blowing, cash becomes king, absolute king. So they're the 3 areas we're going to focus on as we move into, and I'm going to start into looking at the valuable formula element first off. Are we doing okay there, Shona?
Sorry, Brendan. Yeah, all good. No questions in at the moment. So just a reminder to everybody, any questions, just pop them into the Q&A on your toolbar for Brendan. But all good so far, Brendan.
Okay, that's great. I'll move on then. Okay. So let's talk about this whole concept of your valuable formula. And you've probably heard people talk about business models as they move forward. You hear that on the radio and all these business programs all the time. And I'm in this business for 30 something years now at this stage. And I have to say, I left qualified as an accountant, worked in business, and I hadn't a clue what they were talking about when they were saying business model. That kind of dawning came a little bit later to me, and it's not at all complicated, but it makes a huge amount of common sense. So all good business models, are based on a valuable formula. And, so valuable formula business model, they're effectively the same thing. And they focus on 4 basic things, right? First of all, it's in again, what do you sell? You see the what element of the equation there? So that's your product or service at the end of the day, what you're offering at the moment. As I say, whether it's services or whether it's a product or some marriage of both of those. That's the product element of what you do. The who buys it from you is your customer base. So if you go and pull down your debtors list, or the people who walk into your convenience store every day, they're the people who come to you. And the reason they come to you is the why. Maybe it's because, you're doing something in there that suits them, whether it's proximity of location, whether it's how you service them on a day-to-day basis, the value proposition. Like, people come to you for a reason at the end of the day. So the who and the why are kind of very linked, because that's the rationale that do it. But the third element there, the how, is very much in how you make money out of it. And as I said earlier, if you're not making money, that's an unsustainable business model. If you think about it, if you have a great product and you've loads of people buying it and you can't make money, that's there's one leg of the 3-legged stool there is actually it's unsustainable. And similarly, you can have great products and kind of know how to make money out of it, but if nobody's buying it, it's no bloody use to anyone, is it? So this is the balance that you have to look at when you're down there. So again, if you go in and looking at strategy in times like this, it's very much about developing business models that are scalable in this new world environment of COVID-19. We're in it, and we're probably going to have it around with us for the next while. And even when it's gone, we're going to have a fear about kind of how we do things. So we need to kind of re-engineer what we do when we're out there. So when it comes to your, competition, you look at any of these kind of Porter or these guys who talk about competition, what you do, you can stand out and be successful with a business model if you're the cheapest, if you're different. So either you're going to have price leadership, or you're going to have a differentiation strategy. You're offering something that somebody else doesn't have, or you're offering something in a different way, or you have a particular segment focus on a particular area of business. And what's really important is to understand which of those forces is at work in your particular business. And in good times, you can take your valuable formula for granted, because you know what? The business keeps coming all the time. Sometimes it even surprises you. The order book keeps going. You smile to yourself and it's fantastic. We've got something right. And you take it for granted, and you forget, and you don't really understand it. That's got to stop now, because things have changed. So in bad times, the dynamic can change, for both strong and weak value propositions. If you were already weak going into this, it's probably, you're in a more precarious position. But even those with strong value propositions who were really good at what they were doing, the dynamic can move, and that erosion can be dramatic. Like a complete lockdown enforced, but it also can be kind of slow and insidious, and it can manifest in reduced margins, maybe a loss of market share. The orders aren't coming in from the same people that were in there. People don't want to renew it, and you'll see it in declining profitability. So when you're looking at your business model and kind of reimagining it, you've got to take all those elements into place. So when it comes to your product offering, you need to be saying to yourself, well, how can it be developed? How could it be changed? How could it be delivered differently? And they're the questions you need to ask yourself when you're looking at your customers. One thing I should say about your products there, it's kind of critically important that you understand where you're making your money from even before the crisis. I mean, do you know where your most profitable products are, or your most profitable service lines, and how much of your revenue is dependent? If it's all homogenized together, sometimes it's hard to discern that. And that might, an exercise of looking at that kind of profitability by your products or your particular lines could be really useful. That's one thing I'm talking about my dad, what you call it, a lot, but one of the things he was brilliant at, and he'd have a divisional profit and loss account for every department he had in his small store. So he knew how much he was making from TSN, how much he was making from books, how much he was making from records. He had it. He could say, listen, this is where I make my money. That's when I make it. you need to be able to answer that. That helps you when times get tough. Having that kind of knowledge helps you at the end of the day. Okay, and because what you're trying to do ultimately is future-proof your offering, whether it's got to evolve from what it is now to what it's to kind of been a viable, tangible product for the future at the end of it. And you need to look at your customers in a similar way and kind of say, listen, well, who are your best products? Who uses them? What's the demographic and or the model of what your best customers look like? Are there customers you shouldn't be dealing with anymore because they drag you down all the time? Is this the time to fire them? So what you want typically, ideally, in an ideal world, is more customers of the type that you want to deal with and that have been good for you and who get what you do. So categorizing your customers into groups according to profitability and different attributes, that will help you to do that filtration and decide who's in and who's out, so you don't waste precious resources focusing on a sector that doesn't really appreciate what you do. I hope that makes sense. And then when you kind of sit down in this as well, from the point of view of looking at your, again, the reasons why people want to buy from the business, there's nothing like going out and talking to your customer base and see how it's impacting them, see if you can do something from you. Again, if your multinational has been buying for you for the last 10 years, you must be doing something right. Find out what it is, that's your why, so to speak, and try and build upon that. And making money is critically important, right? So you've got to look at kind of all that re-engineering costs, and if you drop products or introduce new ones, how much can you make out of it? So if you're going to spend more money on target marketing or cut marketing back, what's that going to mean financially? So you need to look at it in terms of profitability, and to make money you need to do three things at the one time, right? You've got to return a profit, so it's got to be more than it costs. You've got to be able to turn that into cash for your cash flow, and you've got to get a return on your investments. When all three of those are increasing together, you're making money. When they're declining or one part of them is wrong, or out of kilter, that's when you're not making money, and you can trade very strong and the cash can be awful. And I'm looking at cases on a day-to-day basis now where trading is booming but cash is not, and whether that's because they have too much debt or they've expanded, or they're offering too much credit to the people they're supplying. There's a different mix, and every business is different, but the fundamentals surrounding it won't be. So that's where we are. That's my little conversation, so to speak, on in and around the whole business model. So I think, Shona, what we might do now is just kind of, I've talked about those factors there, and I think you have a poll that you can throw up there for people.
I do. Just one thing. I just need to. I've got a question here for you, if that's all right.
Sure, that's great.
Would you mind repeating the statement on profit, please?
That's
profit. A question from the audience. Yeah, you made a statement on profit.
Statement on profit. Goodness gracious.
Helena,
which one was this in terms of this?
Profit to make money.
How you make money.
How to make money, but yeah, the profit.
Making money basically in terms of profitability. So first of all, you have to, that basically means you need to sell it for more than it costs, right? So that it makes a contribution. So if you're selling for 100 euros and your costs or your input cost is 50 euros, be that, and the input costs at a gross profit level tend to be what you buy it in at, what it costs to manufacture, and that can include parts, materials, or labor cost. Subtract one from the other and you have a gross profit. And the gross profit basically then funds the payment of your overhead. And your overhead is the investment in all those other elements of your business that you need to run it. So basically it's your marketing, your finance and administration function. It has to make a contribution. And the contribution you get from your gross profit has to be bigger than the sum of all that overhead to make a profit. And that's actually, that's the simple definition. It's what's left over is your profit after you've paid everything else. Cash flow, some of those things don't automatically turn into cash at the start because you have debtors, people who owe you money. And sometimes you fund that by people who basically, where you buy your supply chain will give you terms of credit. So that can knock it out of kilter in a sense. You're waiting for money from the people you sold to, and your suppliers are waiting for money for you. And that kind of helps to finance a business. But then you also have money tied up in stock. And if your stock is growing faster than your business is growing, what's going to happen is that's going to consume cash. If you have to buy a whole pile of fixed assets or equipment to take your business, that's going to consume cash. And that's different than profit. If you have to pay back loans, loans have to be paid back out of profit. So at the end of the day, you make your money at the end, and then the bank says, well, you owe me, what do you call it? You've borrowed 100,000 and that's over 5 years. So I want 20,000 of your profit to pay my loans. That's the difference between cash flow and profit. And the return on investment piece is literally how much of those assets that you need, how much money do you need to kind of buy whether it's your building, whether it's your equipment or whatever, to deliver a return, the profit relative to those assets that you have to put in. They're the three elements. And as I say, all those three elements need to grow at the same time. So if you're really going to make money.
Great.
Hope that answers it.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I just have another couple of quick ones here, if that's okay.
Sure.
There's a question here about invoice discounting and how is that recorded? Now, Brendan, I'm not sure, do we need more on that question?
Well, listen, let me give you the general bit on invoice discounting. So effectively this is a working capital form of finance in the sense that, and let's explain what it is first. If you sell, your services or equipment onto a third party, and let's say it's 10,000 euros for picking a figure, but they're looking for 90 days credit or 120 days credit, so you're not going to get paid for 90 days. What invoice discounting allows you to do is to go and basically sell that invoice to the bank, and they won't give you all of it now. They'll give it, depends on the state of your business, but let's say they give you 80% of that. So you'll get 8,000 euros immediately in cash from the invoice discounting provider, who can also be your main bank. And they'll charge you interest on the loan also, and they'll charge you arrangement fees. There's a kind of an annual fee for having the invoice discounting facility. But effectively, so that means that it bridges the gap between the day you sell and the 90 days or 120 days you get paid. You get the cash straight away, but you pay interest on it. And the big danger with invoice discounting in times of crisis is it's great for a growing business. So if your turnover is going from 100,000 to 200,000 to 300,000, fantastic. It provides it there. It's really, really good. But if you have a very seasonal business that's up and down, then you're set. Then what happens is after the 90 days, the bank come looking for their money back, whether you got it or not. And that's the rub. At the last recession, there was a lot of bank offering, because they were able to tie it onto, the bank actually owns the debt. So they own the relationship with the debtor. So they have security. But if they're not getting paid, as I say, they look for their money back. But this is working capital finance. It's not long-term finance. This isn't for 5, 10, even a year. That's for months. So I don't look at it as a form of long-term funding. It just helps you in certain times of cash flow.
Great.
Is that good?
Brendan. Yeah, that's perfect. I hope that's answering those questions for you guys there that put them through. I have two more, Brendan. Can I give them to you now, or do you want to wait till later?
Yeah, no, good. Give them to me now. Sure. Let's go with the flow.
Okay. Yeah,
and
brilliant.
Then we'll take two more and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Two more. Okay, brilliant. So, will the ability of companies to be able to transition to remote work options for their employees be a positive for the economy in the long run? Good question.
Okay. That's a very general question, so but I will give you my belief that it will be positive in the long run. Yes, and I'm doing that from my own experience, because I have my team. Some of my team are working remotely. I haven't seen them since February. The productivity is probably a little bit better than it was before, because we've just adapted it. So I see it as a huge productivity improvement, even for myself. As I said, I'm not traveling to Donegal for a day up and a day back to hold a meeting in the middle of that, and so I can do that now pretty much because it's become acceptable. Acceptable means of communication. It won't replace completely what I call the person-to-person thing, but it's because I think that's important now and again, especially if you're doing kind of complex business planning, whatever, to spend some time with the people, or you can't do it all remotely. But do you know what? You can do, it's the old 80-20 rule. if you can do 80% of what you do online, whatever that means, that 20% only needs to be spent on traveling, and that ain't bad.
Great. Okay, Brendan, thanks for that. Fantastic. And last question at the moment. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. That's what Brian says. So, Brendan, do you see government introducing a BES type scheme to release money for depositors?
Release money for depositors. So that's okay, to try and rechannel funds from the private sector, the cash that's out there, back into businesses. I think it's an extraordinarily good idea. I think we are going to this needs to be long-term solutions. I mean, a lot, as I said, the COVID-19 with the strategic banking corporation, it's very short-term money. And it has to be serviced and paid back in 3 years. We're going to need long-term solutions, and maybe something like a BES scheme where you it may have a longer profile, like 10 years, and channel money back into it. That could well be an attractive place for that cash that's looking for a home, especially if it was guaranteed. So I actually think that's quite a good idea. I have other ideas about kind of what will flood back in, but they're all very personal. It's not a specific thing you can count with your business. It's happening out in that environment out there. I don't control it. But clearly, I mean, I know David McWilliams and the like are looking at, the cost of borrowing should be brought down. Money is virtually free at the moment. And trying to get that to people who they need it without the costs will put a lot more money back into the economy. I kind of go along with that. We propped up our banks at the last recession from the point of view of they got a lot of breaks. A lot of even the lending that's happened now is state backed. So if the government have to cross subsidize the banks again, so that the actual consumer this time, because this is going to be a consumer led recovery rather than what I would call a business led recovery, we need to get the money down to the consumers. That's really what I think, and those businesses that are consumer facing. But that's personal. It's nothing. There's no endorsement of that by anyone I talk, work, or do anything for.
You won't okay. To do it. But just a final piece on that, I see another comment or question in the chat here. Do you see the government reducing VAT in the hospitality industry at the minute? I would think that they would have to. We heard PwC on this morning, even from whether they do it through tax breaks or whatever. That's one thing, and they're also talking. I think they're like what we've got so far. We've just got a sticking plaster, and it's not super strategic. They've done the best they can in the short time that's in there, but a lot of people are still waiting to see, and people are cautious about taking on debt. So the release may have to come in more transactional level rather than in structural debt and things like that. And I don't envy them their job. This is not going to be easy, but the only thing I'm certain about is that the way out of this is to flood the economy with money. And that mightn't go to all the right people. But you know what? I think we're going to have to suck that up. The important thing is to get the money back in the economy and get it moving again. And we're an open economy. So even that in itself isn't the full panacea for getting out of this, because we need the world to recover, if we're really going to trade with it. But let's start at home first. Great, Brendan. Okay, I'll launch the poll here. So first poll of the session, and hopefully you should all see it on your screen now. So if you could all just pop in your answers to that. What factors will have changed in your business model, just based on what I talked about there? And will it change what you're going to offer? Who will buy your offering? Will that change? Why will people buy from you? Great. I can see people popping in their answers now at the moment. We just give it a minute, and I'll be able to put the results up on the screen then.
Mm-hmm.
They're still coming through.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it here. It's actually coming up.
Can you see it? Yeah.
I can, absolutely. So we'll leave it open for a minute, for another 10 seconds, and then we'll move on.
Okay, we close it off.
Yep, that's good. So that's interesting. So the big impact then is So what you're seeing is the major impact is how you make money from what you do is going to change. Followed closely by what you offer has to be adapted or changed somewhat, and even your customer base. So that's a fairly profound change, and the reasons why people buy from you will change. So that's really to provoke a bit of thought about what you need to do in your own particular business. I can't be prescriptive in and around that, but obviously this is going to have an impact. And in fair play to all of you, you're recognizing that nobody seems to be in a fool's paradise, that the world is going to remain the same. So we'll move on. Okay, I don't know how I get rid of that, Shauna.
Just use the X.
I'll close it. Yeah, I have it.
Yeah, I have closed it down. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then when you do change your business model, what I would say to you again is, test it back out into the marketplace. You don't live in an island. Okay. So those factors that are going to change in your business model and how you make money, or whether it's different products or evolutions of it or customers, look back out at the impact in the wider marketplace when you change it. Like, what's happening in your industry? See how does it fit in there? You may be a follower, you may be a leader in that. Look at what your competition are doing. See if there are ways to kind of change, to adopt technology, what do you call it, and see what's happening. So it's got to be, while you're looking internally at your business model, you've always got to test it externally. Okay. We'll park up the valuable formula, and I'll move on to the next piece, which is, I had it out here. I've seized up for some reason. Whether it was the poll or whatever.
Okay, so I've stopped sharing the poll now at the moment. Unless you want to stop, there we go.
There we go. There we're off. Yeah, the poll just obviously causes a little bit of a peep. So let's talk a little bit about cash, if we could, at the moment, because this is the core, I suppose, the core of the topic we wanted to hear. And I'm going to pick up a few threads that I've talked about earlier. So what I'd say to you, when you're managing for cash, and this might sound a little bit kind of frightening, but look at your business as if you were threatened in a kind of a pre-receivership position. So kind of batten down the hatches and just kind of take a look through it and go through a structured approach of trying to see where you can conserve cash. And this starts with the balance sheet. As I said, I went through that before. While your profit and loss is a record over a period of time, a year or months or whatever, the balance sheet gives you a snapshot of your business at a particular moment in time. So let's start with that. So try, insofar as you can now, not everybody has control over this. So, but what you really need to examine first, and this is what I do with every business I'm looking at, is examine your debt to equity. How much money do you owe relative to how much of your own equity is in the business. So examine the gearing, right? A lot of us have availed of moratoriums that are out there already. So again, what you call it, and as we should, and they look like they're going to continue into the back end of the year. Look at shareholder loans. Can you convert loans that were into equity to try and get your balance sheet, turn a loan into equity? I'm seeing a lot of balance sheets at the moment, especially to my work with Enterprise Ireland, where there's intercompany loans or shareholder loans, and saying, listen, well, turn them into equity for the moment, because it'll, in some cases, that actually moves you from being an enterprise in difficulty, which won't qualify for funding, to an enterprise that is now rebalanced and will qualify for third-party funding. And there is the other thing is, like, I'm seeing companies getting new investments from their existing round of investors, whereas, listen, there's a call around because we need more equity, and and they're getting they might be getting a new loan, but they're also getting a new injection of equity. And that's very much kind of along the lines of Enterprise Ireland and SPCI policy at the moment, is that it should be a balanced approach, that it's not the bank coming in or Enterprise Ireland coming in to kind of to mop up all the funding requirement that's in there. So again, look to it. In some cases, you may actually have look at kind of your asset funding, and there might be scope for reverse engineering there. And in good times, a lot of people buy their assets or equipment for cash, and there may be an opportunity to have that refinanced with bank or lease debt at the moment, and that would improve your cash position. And the general rule there is that, you match the asset lifetime to the funding cycle. So if you're going to get 3 years out of it, what you got to take a 3-year lease out of it, and you have more cash in your business for day-to-day working capital. And again, we talked about invoice discounting in there. Be careful around that. That it's for working capital. It's not for capital expenditure. You don't do invoice discounting to go off and buy a new piece of equipment or that. It's literally short-term cash flow. So be sure to get the right type of funding in there when you're out there. So, but it's important. Balance sheet rebuilding, and nearly every evaluation I'm kind of looking at with for Enterprise Ireland at the moment, or others like that, we're saying, listen, this needs more equity, and where can we find the equity? Or we can get a loan in here, but it also needs a bit of a balance. And if anything you can do to make your balance sheet stronger will help you. And I go back to that Economist article, the firms that are going to survive, it'll depend on your industry, your balance sheet, and how quickly you can access cash. So it's kind of important. Secondly, let's take a look at your sales lead cash cycle. If you can shorten that, like when you start kind of out there marketing, day one, you're out there and you're kind of saying, listen, you're looking at targeting things, you're doing campaigns, you're getting out there, and you get into the sales process where you're looking at buying decisions, you're looking at kind of who you give credit to. At the end of the day, that's hugely important in a time of recession, that you get to kind of say, listen, we're not doing blind credit decisions. You can't accept bad debts at this time. They're just sucking cash out of your business. So you need to kind of decide on approval qualifications. Then you need to look at how fulfilling the order. And again, like just in time was a big buzzword we have for holding stocks. You only held as much, a bit like Apple with its telephones. Enough in time is probably what we're talking about now, because you have to be able to fulfill orders. And I've seen businesses just stop because, we don't have the raw materials to do it. So you need to kind of look at fulfillment. How quickly do you bill? It's no point in waiting 6 weeks before you issue a bill for work that's done. Get it out fast and collect fast. So I often say hiring a barking dog for your collections in these times usually pays for themselves at the end. So if you can shorten that sales lead to cash cycle, that will do. I mean, there's a lot of stuff where people kind of low hanging fruit where I've seen so many people do, big events, and kind of they might go to trade shows, get a pile of leads, and then they end up in a drawer, and I'll ring them sometime. So don't bother going to the event then. If you're going to actually invest in stuff, just follow it up and pick up that low-hanging fruit at the end of it. And I mean, I understand that oftentimes you're so busy doing what you're doing that you don't get a chance to look at it. And that's the smaller the business, the easier that is to happen, because you're trying to do 10 jobs at once. But again, when you're thinking of it from trying to view a cash flow, that might refocus you a little bit. The next thing then is to look at your supply chain, because that's obviously, and a lot of people have turned to that at the moment, not paying creditors or looking for extended credit terms. And in truth, like the whole chain has kind of frozen a little bit, and there's been a lot of accommodation where say, listen, your March and April invoices, say, listen, we're giving you a deferral for 3 or 4 months, but that cash is now kind of, people are putting their hands out and said, we need it now. So you should but you may be able to do some more long-term deals in and around that. But what's important here is this whole thing of segmenting your supply base as well, and the people you buy from. So identify those suppliers that are strategic to you, and look at tightening those relationships and strengthening them, so that you're actually so that you're getting the optimum connectivity. So talk to them, negotiate with them, make it a partnership thing. For those that are not so strategic, those suppliers that are not so strategic, maybe you need to kind of go out and tender, and then it's just kind of the lowest cost. And you commoditize those things. But with your strategic suppliers, it needs to be closer. It needs to be more of a partnership at the end of the day when you're in looking at what you're doing with them. And again, look at your best moving stocks. I've seen cases where oh, that stock is great, but it's only turning twice a year or maybe even once a year. Try and get kind of very regimented about your stocks and what you're holding and what you're not, and what's slow moving and what's not, and try and turn it into cash, even if you've got to sell it off for a little bit of a loss, or not the optimum profit you'd like to get from it, especially. And then you need to look at kind of your whole workflow improvement as well. Can you change how you work around things so that it's timed better, and your arrangement with suppliers become a little bit better. So that's a few thoughts on supply chain. The next piece here is what you call it, probably really important, and this is Enterprise Ireland and a lot of the local authorities, the LEOs, are trying to get people to do. Plan. Try and develop some sort of a plan. And I would say it's even more important to kind of plan. It doesn't, you won't ever get this right at the first cut, but there's money out there and help out there to help you try and build a kind of a forecast, and a forecast of profit and loss and cash forecast. And you're kind of, what you're trying to do is bridge what happened before the COVID crisis, in the sense that you're saying, well, this is how good we were before the crisis. Here's the warts and all impact of the crisis for 2020. And for most people, 2020 is going to be a car crash, and maybe into 2021. But what you want to do is see some sort of a build up out, for what's going to happen 21, 22. So you have to take a longer profile than you may have done with your cash planning and your financial planning, if you've done any at all. But this is a great little think pad. It allows you to think together with your financial advisors or your in-house accountants about, well, what rationalization measures do we need to take? Let's look at what those things that are driving revenues in our business, are the things products we should be selling more of, things we should be coming down. And it gives you a kind of a think pad to try and play with this. And the old adage, measure twice, cut once, comes into play. So it allows you to look at your business in a systemized way, right from the products you sell to kind of the input costs for those, the labor costs for those, the key cost drivers that are in there, and a lot of businesses are being maintained by the subsidy that's out there at the moment and giving them a breather. What's the impact when they fall away? Are there going to be redundancies down the line that you need to plan for? And then you go into a kind of whole cost, looking at the cost drivers again. What are your fixed costs that you can't avoid in the short term? Your variable costs that kind of go up and down. You're looking at all of that and trying to kind of see, is there ways to think your way out to do this a little bit better. And it can be hugely cathartic. I mean, I have dealt with some very distressed people whose businesses have shut down completely and probably won't reopen until next year. And when we kind of sit down and say, well, listen, you've got the COVID crisis here, you have maybe an asset here, you want to kind of, property here that we can close this piece here. And you come up with some sort of a pathway out through this. It can be quite cathartic in the sense that, you kind of say, okay, we can probably see a way out to the end of this. So I would encourage people to do this planning bit, even if you haven't done it before, because it's, and it may well be, I mean, I'm talking about all good outcomes there, but sometimes it may be, listen, that you're up against it so bad that you might need to take a completely different tack altogether. And in times like this, there is no such thing as failures. There's just outcomes. Okay. So I encourage you very much when it comes to cash management, do a plan, get some sort of view on it. And there's help out there to get it, to help you with that. So when you do your own cash plan for your business, what naturally falls out that is a funding plan. So where can I go to get the bridging finance? Because that's what you're trying to do, really. You're trying to bridge yourself from the situation you're in now to when times will be better. And funding is in there to do that. But you need to do that very judiciously. And I've kind of worked with a lot of kind of business owners where we've kind of looked at the plan and said, listen, we need 500,000 or 200,000 or whatever the number is, and said, well, how quickly can you afford to pay that back? And if 3 years is too much, you said, well, listen, you can't really do that at the moment. You wouldn't want to do that in times like this. And, so this is where I'm hoping kind of the new supports for businesses like that will come from the government, that kind of where debt just won't plug the hole, that it needs a little bit more support. So you've got to be judicious about, just because debt's out there and available and somebody wants to give it to you, doesn't mean you should always take it. But back to your plan that I just talked about, if you have a plan there, you can actually say, well, will I be able to afford this or won't I be able to afford it? You can use it and you can test your ability to pay it back. So that's it. And then there's the other common sense ways to look at cash. So where you're looking at deferring capital expenditure, things that you were going to do. If you say, listen, I was going to buy this new machine, I was going to move in there, stop. Don't do it, reassess. You don't have to hurl on blindly and hope that things are going to work. Put in spending policies and controls. From the point of view, say, listen, well, no, I'm going to become totally cash conservative about things, and everything needs to be run by these two people before we see what we're going to do. It works. I've seen it work in distressed businesses, where you have to second think every piece of expenditure at the end of the day. And that's really adopting this culture of cash preservation from the top down. And the old adage, a fish rots from its head down. If everybody else has to be conserve cash, except the people who are running the business, that's back to front, and you get found out very, very quickly. So it's a top-down strategy at the end of the day. And my final thought on when we're talking about managing for cash is promote your finance function. I'm not sure even if you have one in the business, but get somebody who owns that function. It should be at the center of what you do. It's right up there with who sources the products, how you sell it. It is one of the drivers. And if you've and a lot of businesses do this, where the financial druids in the company are put into kind of one little room and come out once a month with the tablets to tell you how you've done, that's too remote. Okay, so try and put them at the center of everything that's in there. Okay, and then just two little perspectives before we go. When you're looking at your business, you've kind of got to look at it from the inside out, and then you also got to kind of look at it as outsiders would look in. So when you're looking from inside out, I think there are 7 key things you need to know as an owner and a manager. And Shona, you'd have heard of these things before, but anyway, we put them back up. I think, and this is a checklist you go in when I look at any business. I say, listen, okay, do they break down their profit? Can I tell which is making money and what's not making money in their product suite? And maybe it's intuitive. You can really find out when you do segment what your most profitable products are. Who are your most profitable customers? If your bankers ask you, can you say, well, it's these 3 customers, they represent 80% of our business, the 80-20 rule. And often as not, you'll find with all of these things, that 80-20 rule, both with products and customers, you'll find there's a concentration in areas. What are the key costs is the third item that you look at. Kind of, well, what drives costs? Is it people? Is it, is it assets? But every business has its own cost drivers, and you need to say, listen, well, that's important for us. The next thing is, what are your productivity metrics and drivers? So, we all have people who work and labor cost tends to be one of the most expensive investments most of us make. And I call it investments, and that means you get a return on it. And the return, the level of return is indicated by the level of productivity. And have you got good overall productivity metrics, especially in a service business? When it comes to people in manufacturing operations, there's other dynamics like automation that come into play as well. But do you have any productivity metrics? And there's one very simple one anyone can do with labor. Just take your total sales and divide it by your labor force, both for last year and this year. Is it getting better, or is it getting where you're getting more money for your investment in wages or less? But that's a metric, and you can do it in the back of a fag packet. And it's, in often cases, it'll tell you a lot. And then your cash flow dynamics. Can you, do you understand the seasonality of your business? What goes in, what comes out, what kind of credit do you offer? What kind of credit are you getting? What kind of debt do we have to service? What invest? You need to understand those cash flow dynamics. And then there are 2 or 3 things every small business needs to know to make it successful. And that depends on your strategy. If you're deciding to kind of change what you do a little bit, there'll be 2 or 3 things that'll be absolutely critically important to the success of that, whether it's new sales, whether it's the value of sales, whether it's new customers, whether it's cost reduction. Identify what those are and be able to speak about them. And the last piece, have a measure of those success factors. Be able to demonstrate to people that those indicators. Listen, you know, I'm moving in the right direction. Every critical success factor has a related key performance indicator, and that's good. So internally, they're the things you're focusing on. When you're going to talk to banks and other people, they take a colder look. They cast a cold eye. So you should also, because everybody else will. And what they're sitting in, they'll kind of look at, well, how are you doing profitability relative to this year? What impact is it going to have during the COVID crisis? When will you be returning? How solvent are you? What's your productivity metrics? Your leverage, which is basically your gearing, which is basically your debt relative to your equity. How is your balance sheet we're looking at? The impact, understanding why your profit has changed from one year to the next and what's going to change about it next year. How you benchmark against other businesses in the same industry as yourself, and are you getting a decent return on investment on it? That's what anyone looking at throwing money into your business is going to look at from the outside. Maybe less, it depends on how sophisticated you are. The more you're looking for, the more they dive into this thing. If it's a crowdfunding thing where it's going to be a relatively light touch, and somebody's going to look for a home for their cash, you may not get the same level of scrutiny, and the access might be there. But I think you should look at it like this also. So that's me, and I've set up another poll there at the end of the day to say, listen, which is the most important thing that you need to consider relative to your own cash flow? When you're doing that poll there, whether is it getting your balance sheet right? Is it shortening your sales leads cycle? Is it focusing on your supply chain? Is it developing a business plan? Is it developing, getting a funding plan, the right type of funding for your business? Or is it the other, improving the cash preservation culture in your business? So just click on those and see what they do. And I'll maybe take a few questions while that's going on, Shona, if I could.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, we have one there. So back to revenue. So how do you think revenue will deal with the TWSS in respect of clawback repayment tax for businesses?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know is the answer, the honest answer. All I know is that now, in looking at things like when you're looking at the Sustaining Enterprise Grant, when you're doing the applications in for those at the moment, any support you've got in forms of warehousing taxes or in the subsidy schemes are being included, have to be included in. So they're reducing, let's say, the 800,000 that's available, or being reduced by the amount you've got in support. So they may get rolled up into a wrapper, a debt wrapper and you would hope it would be termed off over a period of time. So I think, but I don't really think they've got their mind made up about this yet. But I mean, as I say, I think it's important that I suppose, what was it? It's important that you prepare for it. And you feel that, like, okay, this may come, but I think it'll be termed in some way if they are going to look for it back. And it will be counted against other supports that they offer in the future to make sure that, as I say, it'll probably be just better targeted to make sure that the businesses that are going to avail of it is included in the total reckoning. But sorry, I have no more clarity on that. I wish I had.
There's no other Q&As there at the moment, but Brandon, I have one for you as well, just in terms of warehousing or revenue with, with your monthly returns or bi-monthly returns. I mean, at what point do you feel a business should actually start to warehouse the revenue at the moment, especially with kind of the autumn and more of a crisis possibly looming for us? What's your thought?
Yeah. And again, I'm just, my personal advice to businesses has been, like, certainly for the initial part of the crisis. So you were into kind of February, March, April, when we were in the teeth of it. A lot of companies have warehoused that, and they're being accommodated. Once what I call the subsidies came in and the tax takes were actually lower, and if you had the liquidity to do it, I was encouraging people to pay it, a smaller amount, because like the subsidy isn't taxable anyway. It was just a small amount. So I was saying to people, if you can afford it, pay it. If you can't, well, that the decision's made for you. You can't, and you just have to see how they evolve in and around that. But it depends. I mean, I know some businesses have not quite been as impacted as badly as they thought, and I absolutely am actively encouraging those. So listen, don't start building up this that you don't know what way this is going to be looked at. If it's not as bad, start paying it back, or leave the early warehouse debt to warehouse and just pay the current elements, so that at least you're not building a problem for yourself down the road. But I have no clear answer. I have opinions, but not an answer.
Yeah. And if we had a crystal ball to be able to see into the future when you're trying to plan your cash flows as well for the next few months ahead, it's hard to see it right now.
Exactly.
Obviously, same for everybody.
Yeah.
Will I end the poll? I think we're happy.
Yes,
in there.
I think we're seeing that the shortening the shales to leak cycle seems to be the one that kind of has got most of the, and the financial planning following a quick second. And I think that's kind of important if you can do that. So interesting mix there. Anyway, I'm glad the stuff, and I can see restructuring your balance sheet. Yeah, that's got the lowest amount, and there's probably a reason for that, because you're kind of stuck with the sins of the past for a lot of people. It's harder to do, and it's very hard to get investments in the middle of a financial crisis, especially for a business that's struggling. Okay.
I'll stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
We might have this pause again now when we're waiting for that poll to finish.
Possibly. So if you just X out of the poll there, Brendan, I have shut it down on this side.
Okay.
And the same for all participants, just exit off your screen.
Okay.
Hopefully that works.
Okay.
Great.
We got no delay that time, which is great.
There we go.
Everything okay with everybody else? That's good. Okay, this is the last section, folks, so we'll be letting you out on time. We're chewing away the time as it stands, but I think we'll get there. The last piece is modifying your operations, and this is by necessity. This is adapting to the changing environment, and boy are we going to see more of this. So when you're in here, what you're trying to do here is maintain competitive advantage. But again, interesting, there's a kind of a global poll being conducted by the Economist Intelligence Unit in and around strategies that CEOs across the world, and I think they interviewed about 3,000 business owner CEOs that were out there. And there was two main strategies that came up for dealing with the crisis and how they were going to adapt and change their business. The first one is that, funny enough, they were all actually going out marketing, right? Looking for more market share in the area that they were in there. But that wasn't unanimous. The one thing they were absolutely unanimous about was they were going to try and improve their operational agility, bar none. They all said that's one strategy. We have to get out and modify our operations if we're going to survive through this. So, and that's all about improving effectiveness and efficiency. And I've cut off the back end, the 5 tail fins of the rocket there that I had there. That's your checklist that you walk through when you're looking at modifying your operations. So you're going to look at your products and services, your marketing and sales, your finance, your people, and your systems and processes. Now, we've talked about finance when we did the cash flow in the last section, so I'm not going to come back to that, but I'll deal with the other 4 now in sequence. So let's just talk about the products and services. So again, and this has happened with a lot of businesses that where our orders were frozen, they're in the pipeline. Can they be held on to? Can you retain them? Or is it possible, now in the future, to kind of to actually retain those and deliver them next year, or deliver them post-COVID at the end of this? So if you're fully shut down, that's where you're absolutely stymied. Some of the service businesses that I were dealing internationally have migrated some of their stuff online, but they've got to think about that in terms of, okay, well, that's okay for a stopgap now, but is there a full product in that in the future when you're looking at it? So it's really important when you're out there. Next thing I'd say you should take a look at is if you have any research and development type activity. So this is kind of, I'm going to do a new line, I'm going to do new business development, I'm going to open up a new branch, I'm going to kind of, so anything that's going to out there looking for more customers, for the products you're out there, you need to really look at cash flow and payback, especially if this is a fairly major. So, you've got to look at how you're doing things. And in some cases, you'll say, listen, I really need to accelerate my research and development and product development and create a new product to replace the one that I'm going to lose. That's more investment. Other ones, you say, not so much. I'm not, the payback on that is going to be way too slow. I'm going to shelve that one. So, and the same with any expansion plans, clear payback. You've got to see if it's in there. I mean, I have one particular business that we were doing. We've morphed it onto kind of online training, and the payback is very evident. But it's going to need about 150,000 investment right now to get it done. But if they don't, they're dead in the water. So they have to do it. And in fairness, again, we're looking at partners in Enterprise Ireland and saying, listen, this is what needs to happen. And there is funding out there to support that if you can make a decent business case. But it's not turning up and sticking your hand out and say, I have a great idea. You have to have done the thinking behind it. You have to have established that there is a business case. And if you do, there's money out there and support to help you do that. So again, what do you call it? When you're looking at the whole thing about the supply thing, let me just reiterate that again. I'm not going to labor it, but become best friends with your strategic suppliers and communicate with them. It's incredible when you talk with people what arrangements you can come up with yourself, rather than kind of keeping them 200 miles away from you, especially the important ones. I've seen negotiations where there's credit terms, where they're holding stocks, where there's call-offs being done, because the business, your business and their business are so linked at the hip that it's good for everybody to work that close together. But do the other things. Measure your payables turnover. So if you're kind of creeping credit out there, I was looking at a business yesterday that's creeping its credit by 30 days. I remember talking and said, well, have you asked them whether you can do that, or you're just going to force credit? Because if you force credit, you can set off a cascade of events down the line, which you may kind of get away with for a year. But turn the new year, when everybody's looking for the money and nobody has any tolerance for you anymore, or they're sending in debt collectors in because you forced credit, cut that off at the pass. Try and kind of get ahead of the game and look at kind of not forcing credit. And if you're scrambling around looking for invoice discounting from one person's looking for, there's all sorts of short-term credit package out there. If you're dealing with a multiplicity of people at that level, and maybe even looking to the revenue as well, that's an uncomfortable place to be. So watch what you're doing there. Be careful, be really, really careful. And that's when you go back to the financial planning piece that I was talking about before, because it's a short-term solution, but the problem will become very long-term. Then I suppose that the last thing, when you're looking at modifying your operations, you need to look at the whole operation and the process itself. If you're starting up again, what needs to happen? What's the investment needed? And there are grants out there to help you that, whether it's a lean, if you're a what do you call it, an Enterprise Ireland business or a Leo business or a local authority. There's small grants out there to help you get back and reopen and get you back into business. So, but you have to, again, how does that fit into your financial plan when you're sitting at the end of the day? What's it going to cost you? This stuff doesn't come cheap. I had to equip everyone in my business with a kind of a new set of computers. We had to upgrade all our kind of remote working capability. All that costs money. And there may be more that needs to get done as we move further into this. So again, sitting down and review your checklist to see what needs to happen, really important. And some of this you may have well done already. When you're looking at your whole marketing and sales piece, then let's look at that element of it. So again, this is all, I talked about the unfilled sales, deferral and cancellation of them. We've mentioned that already. But let's talk about the whole area of marketing expenditure. So again, return on investment is a real important thing. So if you add up your total marketing spend and divide it by your total sales, you'll get an indication of return. But I think a much better measure would be kind of, well, if I'm going to invest 10,000 in marketing, how much new business did I get out of it? So, and when that makes you focus on the fact that are you hitting the right target, those new customers that you want to hit of the type that you want to do business. So you've got to make sure it's focused on the right target, because there's no easier way to blow money than kind of broad spectrum marketing. So focus on your market, focus exactly what you're going to spend on that, and then measure the return on that investment relative to that spend, not in terms of overall sales, but that spends. I get businesses who look at their marketing spends in terms of, okay, well, the year on year from existing customers, how much do we need to spend to address them from a marketing perspective? If I'm trying to acquire new customers, that's a different spend and different targeting with a longer lead time. And what you spend this year may not pay back until the following year, or even sometimes 2 years down the road. Sorry. So, but watch it really closely. But what I would say is, please don't just cut this back. I mean, it's in a time of crisis, that's sometimes where the biggest opportunity is out there. So it's actually about targeting better. And it's about kind of making sure that you're talking to the people who you need to talk to, and articulating your difference to those particular businesses. That's your new business model that you've done, that you'll have knocked out there. And don't be afraid to use low cost marketing activities. You know, the loyalty programs, referral programs, you know, we have a great sense of community here. And people like to feel part of it. So if you're not using them, maybe look at doing that. And let's look at the technology piece again. Maybe there needs to be more of an investment in online marketing. I'm a bit of a Luddite myself when it comes to it, but you have to go with the flow here. That's where that's where the business has been done. And do you need to invest in that? You know, because it tends to be targeted, cheaper, and it tends to be very measurable. All the things that you kind of, as a finance head, that you kind of like when it comes to marketing are all encapsulated and they're readily available in when you make a spend. So I hope that makes sense to you. The third thing when it comes to marketing and sales is this is all around your pricing strategy. So be really, really careful of using discounting to try and get volume. Okay, in the short term, that can work if it's campaign focused, but you've really got to understand what the cost of it is to you. You know, if you're going to sell 1,000 units now rather than 500, and it's going to be done cheaper, that has an impact on your profitability, because your costs may well remain the same or even be increased at this time. And let me just show you a kind of a quick example of that, if I might. So again, look at the example here I've flashed up on the screen. And if you look at, there's 3 columns there. There's the now column, which says I'm selling 5,000 units. So it's 100 euros a unit. So my total revenues are 500,000. My direct cost per unit, whatever that is, whether it's labor hours or whether it's widgets or whatever, is 70. So my total cost of goods sold there is 350,000, and I'll make a profit of 150,000, a gross profit of 30%, 150,000. And if nothing changes before and after, that's how it would look. Now watch what happens. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply a 10% discount, which you decide to make. Let's say you sit around and you do your strategy, say, listen, if we lower our prices, let's say by 10%, we can get a lot more business. Let's just see what the impact of that is. Now look at the column which is under revised. Okay, so if you discount by 10%, you're now selling for 90 euros as opposed to 100 euros. And the impact, what do you call it, on that is that to make the same amount of money, so to speak, and to deliver the same 150,000, what you have to do now is sell 7,500 units. That's a 50% uplift to afford that 10% discount, especially when you're already trading at 30%. That is a dramatic impact on, and on top of all that, your activity costs are probably going to go up, your overhead below the line. So just be careful. And the converse is true, by the way, on when you haven't modeled it here, if you're looking at tactical price increases, which are happening out in the marketplace there. You look at a lot of your hairdressers and pub women, they're actually adding to their price, because people are willing to pay for it to get out there, because the economics has changed. But they don't have to sell as much because they're charging higher on rate. So again, look at your pricing strategy and look at the correlation with volume. Really, really important. And don't just blanket discount. Do it by all means if it's tactical, short term, and you're happy enough that you can afford it. But if you can't, if you get it wrong, the impact on the gross profit bottom line, if you don't manage to move it up the full 50% in this particular scenario, then you could be looking at some sort of trouble. And that ratio, by the way, will change depending on what your standard gross profit margin is, one way or the other. Okay. Then we talk about people. So again, a lot of us have done this already. We've looked at our HR strategy, what we've got, and the people have been laid off. Some of the full-time people have been on there. You're looking at kind of what you're going to do. Sometimes they've got short time, and most people have adopted the subsidy scheme at this stage, and that may or may not be taxed at the back end of the year. They're saying it will be in the hands of the individual, but I always said this is a subsidy for the business, not specifically for the employees, to try and make sure there's a job there for them at the back end of the year. So this is to support the business, and you don't have to take there may be woes down the road for the employees. There may not. It depends how rigorously they enforce it. But business first. It's there to help the business, sustain the business, and in the long term, the employees. Excuse me, need to take a wee drink. Thank you. Okay, and then we come to the ugly thing of rationalizing pay. And again, it's really important again to protect the business as a whole so that the jobs are there in the long term. So a lot of the private businesses that I'm working across are actually cutting back pay right across the board, and probably more heavily so at senior management level down, because they're trying to make their models work and say, listen, until we get back up, we all have to kind of pull the belt in. The COVID relief and subsidy scheme is one thing, but those who didn't qualify for it, and even when we get back to it, you can't just switch on where you left off the last time. And if you try and manage, kind of incentivize your best performers, use bonuses instead of saddling yourself with kind of permanent kind of pay levels. So that's one thing, you kind of plug that in and plug that out. But when you're looking at your people, I say, listen, adopt a kind of a segmental approach to looking at your investment in people. So again, if you're looking at kind of your, there's people that you absolutely need to keep at all costs, and they need to be slightly different than those who kind of might just need to be kept at economic cost. So there was kind of, there are people who you keep at economic cost, and then there's others who just say, listen, they're going to just, if they go, I'm not going to replace them. And then there are probably a fourth group down there as well, who you'd sit down and you'd say, listen, well, you know what? These people are not adding to the value proposition at all. And they are the people you may have to consider making redundant at the end of the day. So again, there are the people you keep at all costs, the people you keep at economic costs. There are those you allow to fall by the wayside through natural attrition. And then there's the fourth type that need to go. And that's a hard and cruel segmentation to look at, but it's duty now for the future. And I'm recommending you do that review yourself. And that's not to be hard-nosed, because I also believe that communication is more important than ever at the moment. People are, I've worked with businesses that have hit the wall and nearly full stopped. And as long as you keep the lines of communication open with them, people tend to be understanding and they tend to be reasonable. And that's that's important. It's not that you have to have a good news story every time you talk to them. It's just that you talk to them. So don't do the thing of kind of where you feel that I have to give them a solution, or there has to be an outcome. Sometimes just the conversation says, we don't know. We're not sure what the guidelines are going to be at the end of the year. We're not sure if they're going to tax you. Just say, but this stuff is out there. Talk. People, it's the human element of what we do. And I think most people respond extraordinarily well to that. So final section then that we look at then is probably fairly self-evident. Systems and processes. Adopt the new technology platforms. They're there. The world and its mother are using them. So get out there and try and embrace the web-based tools that are out there. Again, the way things have changed in recent years means that software as a service, you don't have to go off and spend huge monies on a software package. Most of the stuff is done in the cloud now, so it can become an operational expense rather than a big upfront capital cost. That's the way it's working. And it'll allow you to, but you need to get on board with that, because that's the way the world is going. Look at your whole CapEx cost and do the cost benefit analysis. Again, when you're looking at the criteria for anything, when you're doing any investment, in that is it going to help increase or maintain revenues, or will it help reduce costs? Will it increase productivity? At the end of the day, and if it does, that's fantastic, and that'll help make the decisions. But don't cut back on core systems. I've seen people consider cutting back on disaster recovery systems and that, and God, sure as eggs is eggs, that's when things go terribly wrong, and then you have no support structures in place. So just be careful. And again, down to the cash and preservation culture that's in there, you need to be looking for increased internal efficiencies everywhere. There's always a better way to do things, and we need to become those agility, not just financial muscle, as I said earlier. It's going to be something really important. So take a look at how you're doing it and see, is there a better way of doing it? And look back at what hasn't worked in the past. Poor systems are often covered by good business performance, where the money's just flowing in and you say, oh God, I must get to it at some stage. You don't have that same luxury when times are bad. So poor systems will need to be changed, or dumped at the end of the day. And any systems that don't add value, get rid of them. Just get rid of them. So that's pretty much it. So that covers that particular segment. Again, I know this is a whistle stop, so I can't cover everything in the time we've got. But I'm trying to give you this checklist of stuff, and that's what I'm throwing out here. So what I'm asking yourself, I suppose, I think we've done another poll in this, is how will you modify yourself operationally? So we have a poll that we can throw up on this, and I'll take questions then, Shauna, too. But again, okay.
Sorry, Brendan. Yeah, there we go. I've launched the poll.
Great. So again, if what I've talked about is, again, when you're looking at modifying your operations, what will you modify in your delivery processes? What will you change in your marketing and sales side of things when you're in there? How will you promote? By the way, I put the finance function in there. Will you promote the finance function to a more important role within your business? Will you look at your HR and people strategy? And again, adopting and integrating technology. What do you call it? That's how much will you focus? Are they areas of focus for you? So, will we take a few questions, Shona?
Great. Okay.
I'm finished the hard content now. That's me finished with hard content.
Okay. Great timing, Brendan. That's fantastic and excellent content. We've got 2 questions here at the moment. Okay, so the first one, and just before I read these out, I'd ask people, I just put a note into the chat there, but if you have any questions, now is the time to drop them into the Q&A for us, because we will be finishing up shortly. And if you have any comments on today, if you want to drop them into the chat, that would be great. Okay, so first question, can you clarify getting the balance sheet right? Why is this important? What's the link to assets? And lastly, advantages between limited legal structure and self-employed micro enterprises with a few employees.
Okay. So go back to the balance sheet, the importance of it. Yeah, so I suppose you see, that's so, I mean, if you're carrying a lot of term debt, or, so in other words, you're using other people's money a lot to run your business more than your own, so to speak. And that's usually manifest in big creditors, big bank overdrafts, invoice discounting, lots of term debt. That's just going to make you more financially vulnerable, because when you look at your assets in the business, which is, when you go back to the balance sheet, you have everything from buildings to equipment, whatever, they're your fixed assets. And then you have your current assets, which are, your stocks, your debtors, the cash you hold in your bank. Yeah, that's all the assets in a business. And basically then when you take off what you owe to others, right, which is your bankers, your suppliers, etc., what's left over is your net assets, and that represents your equity. That's what you own. But if what you own is very small compared to what you owe others, you're very highly geared. And people will be less likely to throw more money at you, because you're going to be a financial risk. If you give more debt to somebody who already is very much in debt, you're increasing the financial risk. And that's why banks will be slow to do that. That's the first part of it, the balance sheet. And the second part, Shona, was... Sorry, you're on mute, Shona, unfortunately.
My apologies. Sorry, guys. So lastly, advantages between limited legal structure and self-employed micro enterprises with a few employees.
Yeah, as long as, when you're unincorporated, I suppose you're personally liable for nearly all the debt you incur. The advantage of a limited liability structure is that it's the company, which is a separate legal personality that stands independently to you on a personal level. Now, often cases, the banks look for personal guarantees anyway. So you're actually the cloak or the protection of the corporate entity didn't actually stop just at the corporate borders, and you've given personal guarantees. And we've seen that, where especially debt that was advanced in the past, we lend to your company, but you need to guarantee it personally. So it does provide it. The one thing I'd say in the environment we're in now with the SBCI loans and that, a lot of those are being backed by the state. So there's not the same requirement for personal guarantees as there was before, which is a good thing.
Great. Okay. Brendan, brilliant. Okay, so next question. Is there any further news from government on the subsidy for rent payments on businesses that have been severely hit? For example, the French model of the 60-20-20, where the state pays 60%, landlord takes a 20% hit, and tenant pays 20%.
Yeah, I don't know is the truth. I mean, again, pure speculation on my part. That's macroeconomics, and would interest me greatly, but I tend to operate only in the area that I can influence, and so I can't offer anything other than an opinion on that, which is probably not worth the whole pile.
Okay, yeah. Brendan, okay.
I see Kate Lynch has raised a hand there too, somewhere on this. I see it popped up on my screen.
Did it? Okay, Kate, if you could type your question into the Q&A for us, that would be great. I have some other questions here as well, just while Kate is typing in her question. So we are a service industry, as in Place Centre, and have changed our costing, but are nervous of how slow it will be to come back. We are not sure if we should open now or wait, as our overheads are very high. How should we test this?
Wow. Well, this is where I probably look at the financial plan or a model. So, I mean, if you're a play center, your customers are the units of kids or whatever that come through and what you're going to charge for it. And you have, as you say, if your overheads have gone up, you need to factor those in and say, listen, that's what my day-to-day running costs are going to be from overheads for staffing and whatever. And you will look at kind of the rate you're charging by the number of children you hope to get, and you'll establish what your break-even level is. So if that's kind of 40 kids paying 50 euros, if that's what's needed to break even and pay all the other costs, then you have a number there. And then you'll say, well, listen, you may look at you may go and see and do a survey with people who might be interested in using it and see, listen, am I going to cross the 50 or am I going to be carrying it underneath it? If the COVID supports are in place, maybe it doesn't need to be 50, maybe 30 will work for you, but when they fall away, it goes back up to 50 kids. But what I really need to turn a profit is 60 or 70. And then you start playing with those numbers until you actually say, listen, okay, this isn't really worth opening until I can be guaranteed getting the 50 kids or the 40 kids, whatever the number is. That's really how I would probably approach that.
Yeah. Okay, great, Brendan. Thanks a million. Next question. I have a number of foreign employees who see the COVID-19 wage subsidy as their money and are asking for wage increases and seem to blot out that there is a pandemic in Ireland. What would Brendan's response be to this?
Very clear.
I can imagine.
Very clear. Again, when you segment your employees like that, those that are adding value, right? So if they're not really adding value and they're just literally just what I call treading water for you, then nothing but the COVID subsidy payment. If they are adding additional economic value to the business and helping you make money, then I would certainly look at sharing some of that with them. And again, but you go back and categorize your employees and say, listen, and it's down to individuals where you say, listen, there's my employee list. These two are doing nothing. $3,000, I'm not going to leave them go. I have the subsidy, but that's all they're getting. These people here are adding value. And you know what? I'm going to pay a little subsidy over and above. I'm going to pay a little more over and above that to try and maybe that might be equivalent to what their normal take home pay is. And I'm going to pay it because, what's the right thing to do. And that's just how I do it, black and white.
Yeah, great, Brendan. Thanks a million. Kate was actually fine. She hit the button by accident there. So thanks, Kate, for that message. So some comments here as well, just before we put up the poll. Having to become more adaptable, meet the new challenges and overcome them, and maximize the opportunities ahead. Appreciate the call and great information. Thank you. So that's one
Good
comment.
to hear.
A lot of great comments and feedback here, Brandon, as well. Let me just read out some of them here to you. So great advice in today's seminar. Thank you for all the good information. Thank you very much for all the information. Really enjoyed the seminar. Helps keep the focus. Well done, Brandon. Very interesting. Great advice in today's seminar. Excellent webinar addressing several relevant issues straight on and giving very actionable tasks. Thank you, Brandon, Shona team. Thanks, Brandon, Shona, Linda. Another excellent presentation, some excellent advice and nuggets. Great session. Thanks, Brandon. Just looking at finance, but not just looking at finance, but strategy, operations, etc. too. Slides will be great to get. We will be giving them out, don't worry. Great practical and very actionable points delivered today. So really good feedback, Brandon, there. And we've covered all of the questions there as well. I'll end the polling here, if that's okay, and I will share the results. There we go. You see the results?
Yeah, interesting. So we're saying targeting new customer segments is the big winner here. 62%. Which is interesting. But there's action items right across it, which is great. Which is good to see. I mean, it's not going to be the same for everybody. So, c'est la vie. Yeah. Right. So all I can, I suppose, I should shut this down now and say my fond farewells.
Okay.
So, I mean, I suppose what I would be saying here now, the polling thing is my last little slide. Yeah. So yeah, back to what I said at the start, really, just this starts with you. You know, what do you call it? At the end of the day, you know, change starts with yourself. It won't. You have to go to the well for water. So the first thing you do is try and get as much clarity about what you know already and that's your current business. You know, and everything that goes around that, your customers and sales. The more you can dive in and try and understand that, the better. And then you're into the creation pieces. Understand first and then create. You know, again, you know, solutions that can deliver actionable outcomes. So don't be a dreamer. Do everything you come up with is something you're going to actually have to go and do on Monday morning. So if you're not walking away with what I have to do on Monday morning, you haven't got an action plan. And then throughout all this, talk to people. Talk to advisors, talk to your bankers, talk to your accountants, talk to anyone who will, because the more you share, the better, and your employees at the end of the day. And look for the supports that are out there to make those changes that you need to make. You know, when it comes to finance, I always say, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets done. Okay, so turn that focus in on your own business, and I just wish you all the very best with that challenge. And it is going to be a tough one, but I have no doubt we're going to get over this. And that's it for me for today.
Great, Brandon. Well, listen, thank you very much. I mean, the feedback, as you can see, is excellent today. And personally, I found it fantastic. I have about 6 pages of notes to do. Good. So thank you very much. That's great. So again, listen, thank you for your time, your expertise, your knowledge. It was very practical insights along with lots of really good examples that are actually happening out there. So a real great mix. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you also to everybody for attending today. Obviously, today's all about finance. Next week, for our 3rd week of the program, it's going to be with Fergal Brophy, and it's all around creative thinking and innovation. So again, another very exciting webinar. We will share the slides from today and the recording of the webinar with everybody, both who attended and who's registered and couldn't make it this morning. I would also just like to share with you just a quick additional invite. Now, I hope you can see my screen. But my own company have got a webinar happening Wednesday morning, next Wednesday morning at 9:15, and it's been led by Gary Keegan, who's a high performance coach. And it's all around the mindset of a champion. So it's very much around your own self, and it would be great to take tips away from that as well, to be able to bring it into the 4-week program that you're on as well from the chamber. From all the chambers and the SkillNet collaboration. So we'd like to extend that invite to everybody who's part of this program, and Linda will send out the details of that to you all as well. So that would be like a 5th webinar for you to attend. So again, Brandon, thank you so much for today. We are bang on time, 4 minutes to 12, very efficient. And if that's it, I just want to check. I actually see, I have 2 quick questions. Can I give you 2 quick questions? Is that all right?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Brilliant. Hi, Brendan. According to our customers, they will not be operational until September, and we may not have full return of work this year. Government support due to end in August. Would you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, that's I've run into this before. So you're closed. So again, you're going to be faced with the reality of closure, and can you carry it? And this is, I mean, have you got the resources on your own in your own balance sheet basically to carry that closed period, or can you get the support of your bankers to bridge you across? I mean, you're a classic case of where you need support. Have you gone to your local Leo? Or, I mean, there is supports out there. And if it's a viable business, it should get supported. So again, this is back to the communication thing too, as well, I suppose. You've got to put your best foot forward and make what you do look compelling. So during the shutdown period, articulate all that's good about your business. Show a bridging strategy for when it's going to get back up there. If you haven't got the cash yourself, you've got to look for it from some sort of government or other support to get out there. And to do that, you're going to need some sort of a business plan, I would suggest, that's actually going to demonstrate a kind of pathway to recovery. What I would say to you is that, like, I expect that access to credit and grants will probably become easier as this becomes more acute. And the more you're ready for that, even though they're not clear and out in the marketplace, the more chance you will have of accessing that quickly in September. As I say, you're not the first business I've run across with that, but I mean, with the other businesses I've looked at, one of them has enough cash to carry them into actually next January. Then they become critical, but they're still out looking for supports. And they are going to access them because they ran a very good business before they shut down. So demonstrate that you ran a really good business in the past and that they're credible. It doesn't have to be a final pathway to recovery, and it could be multi-year pathway or whatever. That's okay. It's communicating that.
Great, thanks, Brendan. The last one there is there additional resources to more learning? So again, yeah, I suppose you'll have this webinar, as I say, in there. I mean, this is, I suppose the world is full of advice. It's getting the right stuff. Maybe, again, I don't go back through your local Leo or back into Enterprise Ireland. They all have huge education programs available to people depending on where your business is. But certainly in truth, I'm more familiar with the Enterprise Ireland side of stuff. So yes, there is in spades if you qualify there. But I'm sure your local Leo organizations and skill nets and whatever can actually channel what you need. I mean, one of the thoughts I had, it's literally just a thought, is to actually run some sort of a podcast on problems that arise over the next while. But again, it's one of my dream and scheme things rather than get up and do things at the moment. Absolutely. And I just add to that as well, as you said, Brendan, for all SMEs and businesses, like, tap into your local chamber, tap into the SkillNet, like the M1 SkillNet and the Dundalk SkillNet, who are funding these webinars for us all at the moment. And they have a huge broad range of skills and upskilling that's funded. Also, the LMETBs are running courses at the moment. There's courses everywhere, and it is being highly subsidised and funded by government funds and the national training funds. So do reach out, and certainly myself, Linda Ennis, who's on the call. Actually, you can see her name, you can't see her face, but if you want to reach out to us, we'll certainly point you in the right direction of funding and any special courses we know of. We might be able to kind of help match them up for you. So okay, that's it on the questions. I think that's it. I think we'll wrap it up there, Brendan. Listen, again, thank you so much. Fantastic information you've shared and advice, and we're all going to be busy for the next couple of days before our next webinar next week. And thank you very much to all.
Good stuff.
Okay, take care, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.